Hey everybody, this is Sparklestorm and welcome to the Seven Continent Zoo, where you can travel the world without leaving the country. Today we're finishing off the Antarctica section of the park by adding the second habitat inside of the ice cave. And if you'd like to check out how I made this massive ice cave slash ice castle mountain, you can see the build in my video from last week, and I'll add the link in the details to this video as well. So on this side of the path I am adding a gray seal habitat. And now the gray seal doesn't actually live in Antarctica, but the options for this continent are pretty limited in Planet Zoo, so I am just using it in place of one of the 6 species of seals that does inhabit this area, which are the Ross, Wendell, fur, crab-eater, elephant, and leopard seals. My plan for the habitat was to have a long river that extends from their indoor area the length of the habitat and then leads to a deep diving pool at the end, and I'm just really pushing down the ground in this deep diving pool because I want to make sure that it is going to be deep enough for the fish feeder. I did try adding a viewing platform for the deeper area, but it messed with the flow of the guests. If they went down to see the king penguin's deep diving pool first, they'd miss the seal viewing area, so it made more sense to move it further down the path. It took a lot of trial and error to get the pathing to line up, and I had to rework the terrain a number of times because it kept obstructing the path. And looking back on this now, I feel like there was a way easier way that I could have done this. I could have used the shift key to lower a section of path in the middle to the height that I wanted it to be at, and then connected it on the 2 sides to make the ramps, and I think that would have been a lot smoother. In behind the ice wall, I built a little area for the seal's hard shelter and a space where the keeper can enter the habitat, and add a keeper hut in here as well. And here's another little trick that I find super useful. So you'll see in a second here that one of the ceiling pieces shows through the wall, but it's part of this group and I don't want to move the whole ceiling back. So I can select the group and then click on the problem piece and then click split from group on the tool menu, and then I can move it freely. And it might sound simple, but I had no idea how to do this when I first started playing, and now I use it all of the time. It's also great for getting rid of that flickering that can happen when you have overlapping pieces. So just split one piece from the group and move it slightly and the flickering stops. Time to add our seals and see what we need to fix in this habitat. I'm really hoping that the fish feeder will work and I don't have to make this pool any deeper. As soon as the seals arrive, I can see that I need to change the doorway into the pool area because I forgot about their hitbox, which I learned about in my first zoo when my crocodiles were getting stuck in their hard shelter. Even though the door seems big enough for the animal to fit through, it actually needs to be wide enough for the animal to be able to turn around in the space. Now the seals can get into the main part of their habitat, but I can see on the animal info panel that they have no water. Whoops, I forgot to add those cute little steps to get them into the water. So now it works, and the fish feeder is deep enough as well. Success! They do need a bit more traversable space though, so I open up the wall and make their indoor space a bit bigger. After adding some sand and rock, I noticed that the long grass meter isn't moving at all. And I remembered that it's registering everything I have outside on the mountaintop. So I'm going to leave that and move on. And since it's Sandbox, it doesn't matter anyway. Most of Antarctica is covered in ice, and so I'm actually modeling this habitat after the rocky shorelines and some of the offshore islands. The 2 species that live north of the sea ice are the elephant seal and the fur seal. And since the elephant seal is massive, it can be over 20 feet long and weigh up to 8,800 pounds. I'm going to imagine that these little seals are fur seals, which are between 1 and 2 meters long and weigh between 75 and 300 pounds. So as I work on the rock detail and some of the other finishing touches for the habitat, I have a few interesting facts to share with you. As I mentioned, most of the landmass is covered in ice, and that ice can be up to 4.7 kilometers thick. There aren't very many species that live in this ice desert compared to other places in the world, which likely isn't surprising given the extreme dryness, high levels of ultraviolet radiation, and extremely low temperatures, with the world record low being set at minus 89.4 degrees Celsius. Most of the land creatures dwell on the rocky shoreline and offshore islands, and this includes earthworms, insects, and microinvertebrates, including one of the hardiest creatures on the planet, the tardigrade, also known as water bears or moss pigs. These are also nesting grounds for over 100 million birds, including the amazing albatross. The 4 seal species that can live on the sea ice spend a lot of time on the ice since there are no land predators, and these 4 make up about 50% of all the seals on Earth. Seals are known as the dogs of the sea because they are playful, curious, and sociable, but they can also be aggressive and territorial. Seals can hold their breath for long periods of time underwater, and apparently elephant seals can hold their breath for up to 2 hours. And they can do this because they store oxygen in their muscles. They can also dive to great depths, up to 900 meters, and they have a clear third eyelid that covers their eye to protect it when they dive deep, and they also can seal their nostrils. And here's a little throwback to the 80s. Seals have the ultimate waterbed. They can sleep in the water with just their snouts above the surface, and their bodies are in a vertical position, just floating like a fishing bobber. And the sweetest fun fact that I learned was that mama and baby can recognize each other by a unique call. And one research project showed that they can even recognize each other by this call after a 4-year separation. And now back to the build details. So I'm adding in some ice here. I would be remiss not to, since this is Antarctica after all. And so also copying over the iceberg, the floating iceberg, from the middle of the lake in the penguin habitat. Adding in some of those guest barriers all along the front, and then also I'm going to go back and add in the metal rods to detail the glass pieces of the pool as well. So up to this point, I have not been naming my animals in this 7 continent zoo. I have just been letting the game name the animals and keeping them as is. But I recently just watched Sparrow's final tour of Sandstone Eco Zoo, and I was inspired to go back and give all of my animals unique names. So starting with the Japanese macaques, they have all been given names shades of red. So for example, Ruby, Scarlet, and Burgundy are some of the names given to them. And then across from the Japanese macaques, we have the red pandas. And since they are from the Himalayas, they have all been given names of spices that you would find in Himalayan cuisine. So some of them are cilantro and cinnamon. After the pandas, we come across the flamingos, and they have all been given names that are variations of synonyms for flamboyant. So Austin for ostentatious and Dash for dashing. And the reason being, if you haven't seen that build, is because a group of flamingos is called a flamboyance. After that, we have our deer meadow. So our deer are named after meadow flowers like daisy and buttercup. And then we come to our badgers. And our 2 badgers are named after characters in Fantastic Mr. Fox. So we have Mr. Clive Badger and his wife, Mrs. Badger. And in the story, they have a son. However, the son does not have a name. So our Mr. and Mrs. Badger also had a little boy, and I have given him the name Honey. So then we come to our king penguins, and they seem quite regal and royal. They strut about looking quite proud and puffed up. So I thought appropriate names would be from the Bridgertons. So they have all been given names, starting of course alphabetically with Antony. And that brings us to our seals. And since these little guys are also known as the dogs of the sea, and our little fur seals are actually spotted because they're technically gray seals, I thought of the 101 Dalmatians. In here we have 1 male and 3 females, and so we're going to name them Pongo, Perdita, Penny, and Pepper. And then our 2 little pups that were just born, we have 1 male and 1 female, so they are going to be named Patch and Perdy. Now that brings us to the end of the build, and I'm going to leave you with a few cinematic shots. And next week we're going to be jumping over to a new area of the zoo, an area that we haven't started yet, Australia. So thanks very much for watching, and bye for now.